about digital fraud in consumption or consumer purchases, identification, and payments. So I'm going to do a little introduction just to sort of set up the debate and the contours of what we're going to talk about. As you know, cybersecurity is a weapon of defense against cyber criminality. The ill-intentioned states, rogue states, or individuals, or opportunists or criminals use cyber technologies like a weapon, a threat, a way to earn money or obtain money. These threats are more or less sophisticated, but technologies like artificial intelligence or the lack of awareness of the risks of digital technologies among the general population means that this risk has never been higher. Now, just to mention a few of the threats, we had a president of a company in the CAC 40, and there was a semi-industrialized attack. You had Lockbit. There's attacks of about 30 million euros. You had Lockbit and other threats that are extorted millions of dollars. Identity theft, very easy to set up, but much harder to prove, is making the life of citizens awful. Fortunately, tools exist, best practices can be shared, and continuous improvements are in place, and national organizations or transnational organizations continue to monitor our security. A recent announcement concerns fraudsters with a theft of data from 43 million people on that platform. Also, the risk of social engineering, and I invite the guests, Mr. Paul Alexandre Gillot from EUROPOL, I think you might be able to say a quick word about what you're doing at EUROPOL and maybe remind us of what EUROPOL does. Very good. Thank you very much. Hello to everyone. My name is Paul Alexandre Gillot. I've been working since the last 6 months at EUROPOL. Before that, I was in charge of the cyber operations at C3N, the anti-cyber criminality unity of the National Gendarmerie. I also worked with the European police forces, and EUROPOL is in charge of all crimes that impact the European Union. So we have high value targets and high risks, and we have what we call the C3C European the number of European bodies that and French bodies that in charge of that. We have Benjamin Arati, who is in charge of products for cybersecurity. My name is Benjamin Arati. I work for the ministerial digital ministry in charge of the last 4 years of France Connect. France Connect is a product that is used on a daily basis by French people to access more than 1,500 processes online, primarily public and administrative processes, and also sensitive processes regarding cybersecurity. Thank you, Benjamin. And then we also have John Eric Septas from Taito Every. He's going to talk to us in English. So for those who need translation, you have the possibility to have automatic translation, simultaneous translation with your headsets. Now, I don't have the ability to introduce you, so you have a little video presentation of John Eric.
I would like to introduce you to my good friend, John Eriks at SAS, who is working with financial crime prevention. He will be talking about using AI for committing and preventing fraud. Be aware that anyone, including all of you in this room, can be fooled. Do not believe what you see or hear. But now, over to you, John Erik.
Thank you, Jean-Luc, for that lovely introduction. 3 reasons I made this video. 1, I'm a Star Trek fan, that's obvious. I wanted to see how easy it is to create, and it took me a couple of hours to create this. I pulled down some recording from the TNG show. I did a voice, etc. I did a script, etc., and I created this. And also to show that this is a real problem going forward. It's so easy. Anyone can make these deepfake videos, and I call it hacking people. The fraudsters will go the least resistance. Instead of trying to hack the systems, of course they do that as well, they now start hacking people. They already do that. We get phishing emails that, sends you a link and so on. We have a big thing with fake account frauds, where the fraudster call and pretends to be the bank and asks you to transfer the money. They trick you into using, in Norway we have the bank ID, they trick you to use that to get your money. And I'm sure you're familiar with the CEO fraud, where you get an email from the CEO saying, well, it's this urgent, you need to pay out now. Imagine the CEO fraud on screen. You're seeing the CEO, you're listening to him, he's talking to you, convincing you to transfer this money. That's what I call hacking people, and that's a huge problem.
Alors, merci John Erik. Je tiens juste à préciser que nous sommes des vraies personnes, hein, même si la vidéo vous demandait.
Thank you. We are real people, just like and we remain humans, just like you mentioned. So thank you, John Erik, for this, for your comments. And I think that I'm going to maybe ask Paul Alexander to speak first, to do a little state of play of where we are at Europol, and you have a European view of all these problems. And could you maybe look at some of the key figures? Give us some of the key figures. First, to give a sort of framework of what we do in terms of repression against cybercrime, because we're not really doing cybercrime. We're going after cyber criminals. I mean, we don't do cybersecurity. We're going after cyber criminals, where payment fraud is a little bit different, because these are payments that are authorized, where the fraudsters find vulnerable methods of payment, like online payments or in remote transactions, and banking transactions. And we see on this video, the goal of these criminals is to persuade the victim to transfer money to fraudulent accounts. And so this could be either via personification of a president of a company. It could be maybe offers for investment that are very attractive, or maybe possibilities to be able to recover discounts on subscriptions, or so it might also touch what we call romance fraud, where you were lonely hearts cases, where you have fraudsters that might call directly the victims to be able to convince them to transfer money to to accounts that are not particularly well secured. And we also have non-authorized payments, and that's where the fraudsters go directly to the payment details of the victims, and they have access to the banking information of the victim. They can do cyber attacks. They also have other techniques like phishing, or they also have data breaches. Now, the big problem when you're looking about key figures, when you want to see the state of play, it's very complicated for me, because I get to bother a lot of the different teams at Europol to get this information. They are the ones who handle these fraud cases for digital fraud, because quite often we have a lack of awareness of because a lot of people don't complain. They don't file complaints, and not throughout Europe. And I'll get back to that issue later. But once again, it's not just a question, but it's really to indicate there's a real trend here. There's a real movement that we can really see but it's hard to get key figures that are accurate. But the latest. The FBI latest figures from the FBI says that there's about a 10% increase in complaints for fraud, that is to say, where they signal that they were victims of a fraud, and 10% increase in financial loss. So when you look at the age population targeted is between 40 and 50 years old. Quite often, we also have a second part that's over 60 years old, where they have even bigger losses of money. Why 40 to 50 years? I can understand going after the older generations, because maybe they have who have a harder time understanding, digital technologies. Well, I think you can understand these figures when you look at the attraction of that age tranche and the desire to start to. You maybe have a little bit more capital, you have a little bit more money, and you want to diversify your investments. You're starting to look for new possibilities to invest your money. And you can see currently that the criminals are really adapting as well, each year. In 2023, for example, we saw in a lot of classic investment fraud, but there was also an increase of about 53% on investment fraud by cryptocurrency. So they understand the new trend, the desire of people to look at the prospects for investing their money in, for example, in Bitcoin. You can see that Bitcoin is rising, and so you see a lot of fraud with cryptocurrency that's increasing. You can see the countries that are really affected by this. Not just in Europe, but internationally, you see the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada that are at the head of the list. But in terms of Europe, France, unfortunately, is the number one country in terms of victims of cyber fraud. So, and cyber criminality of this nature. And so France is the number country in Europe hit, and then Germany close behind. Is that related to its financial capacity, or are there other reasons why France is targeted specifically? Once again, it could be explained by two aspects. Indeed, with regard to the economic health, maybe also with the need after the COVID crisis to look to more personalized investments. But France is also, I was talking earlier about the fact that very few victims file complaints, and so. As I said when I talked about this in my I will talk about it in my presentation. We have some good mechanisms for filing complaints. We have a platform called Tese, which allows you to file complaints for online attacks. You also have credit card fraud platforms to file complaints. So we have a good organization and a good collection of information to really understand the risks, and also to find ways to go after the criminals with law enforcement. Maybe the final point, and then I'll stop my monologue here, because I don't want to take too much time. But we're really seeing that there is the emergence of a lot of new methods of new modus operandi with fraud criminals who are renewing their approach. And I think in 2023 in France was the first time, and the first time in the world, in fact, that the fraudsters updated their particular modus operandi, which was to do an MC catcher that went around Paris. And so the use of this is a technology that used to be reserved for the state, and now it's being used by criminals. So you can see that the technology now calls them to triangulate the different telephones that are covered in the MC capture zone to send phishing SMSs and then follow up with different fraud schemes. So very clearly, this is the first time that this was put into place and used, and to use these sort of like used to be state-owned technologies that are now being used by criminals. And you can really see that at EUROPOL, we're starting to see the emergence of this phenomenon in different countries. 6 months later, from Norway to Poland, we're starting to see groups that are using the same type of modus operandi, the same type of equipment. Okay, thank you very much for that sort of vision of Europe, and even if we understand that there's some countries that are more targeted than others. But I now want to ask Benjamin a question. We might maybe recenter a little bit the debate around your activity within the DENUM. I'm going to ask you with regard to your activity and the products that you're promoting, what are the fraud cases and the things that you personally are seeing? Yes, indeed. I'm going to talk about what we see in the public sphere. What we see at the denum in terms of fraud, there are several types. The first is through France Connect. It's notably fraud for subsidies from the state. People that pretend to get aid, and they're going to pretend to be they're going to steal the identity of real users to like get their subsidies, to get their funds. So there was a case that happened in 2022. This is a fraud in the training accounts. So people pretended to be real users to collect the money that was due to those people for training. And so they got subsidies from the state that was supposed to be for the training of these people, but that was actually embezzled by these criminals. And this is a big case that happened in 2022. We had other cases. We have my Prime Renault for our energy renovations. So these are subsidies from the state. And so the idea, so fraud is this is really to get subsidies from the state, or you can also see other types of fraud, which will allow criminals to get access to sensitive data to do financial transactions. For example, they changed the banking bank information, the RIB, the bank ID information, and that allows. And so they change the bank account number so that the money goes to their bank account. So, for example, they get the retirement income, the pensions from people. And so these are two types of fraud that allows people to get state subsidies and state aid funds. And we also have embezzlement or people who collect sensitive data, which will allow them to get identification data, justifying documents for their identification, and which will allow them then open a loan or get a credit from a bank in the name of that person. And the third type of fraud is getting access to sensitive data for health. Now, could you maybe give us an idea of the type of mechanism that they use for those three types of fraud that you just mentioned? Well, it's really based on identity theft. We have different mechanisms depending on the identity that's used to access these processes. So you can, if the identification mechanism, for example, is weak, low security, we can observe the more and more phases. You have phases with a lot of phishing to collect a certain amount of information, like the passwords or other identification elements from the users, from the potential victims, and that will allow them then to sell that to other people who can access those accounts to then access the different processes or even access funds themselves. John, I have a question for you. We're going to go then next to Paul and Alexander, but first to you. What are, we have an idea, but maybe you could clarify a little bit more. What are the objectives of these criminals in terms of payment? Because you're primarily involved in, you're more involved in payments. So what are the risks?
TR is a service provider. We provide services for banks to help them fight financial crimes. I'm specifically in the financial crime prevention unit. Of course, the goal is money. I mean, they want to increase their funds. And there are different ways to get this money. I just want to follow up on, you mentioned the dating fraud and the investment fraud. These are typically frauds that take some time because you are sort of working the victim for a long time. Previously, that took manpower. You needed to have some friend that you would go into the romance with, right? Now this is all AI that's doing that. They can set up an AI chatbot. You can chat with that for a long time. You sort of massage the victim for a long time before you actually get people into it. But of course, yeah, the end goal is to get money. We're seeing different kinds of that. It could be like emptying the account. I mentioned the safe account fraud. I mean, you're told your account is under threat. You need to move your money to a safe place. And the safe place is, of course, the fraudsters. Also, you can take up a mortgage. back in Norway where I live, we use the bank ID for everything. I can use the bank ID to sign up for a loan or a credit card. And it's all about getting access to these mechanisms so they can get either a loan, a credit card, or get access to your fund and move them out. Or as you mentioned, the investment fraud, trick you to go to sort of a fake investment site, have you do investments. This takes over time. You can see you invest over time, you see your funds increasing, until the day you say, okay, now I want to extract my funds. And there was a very good example where, okay, now the funds are extracted to your wallet, so they had it in the wallet, but they were fake Bitcoins, not real Bitcoins, so they had a value 0. And yeah, they lost all their money.
Alors, merci. Donc, comme j'avais dit, on va revenir Paul Alexandre. Hein,
Thank you. We're going to go back to Paul Alexander, but we understand that the interest is financial gain, but maybe you can talk about the different ways of managing these fraudulent gains. We talked about cryptocurrencies. Maybe you want to talk about this subject of cryptocurrency fraud. Indeed, I agree. I agree totally with. I'm not going to paraphrase what was just said, but there's the main gain, the main motivation, whether it's direct with the use of payment data or personal information to get information sent to fraudulent accounts, or through direct by reselling information that they sell through the dark web. In terms of mechanisms, we're talking about cryptocurrency, for example. Indeed, in most of these digital fraud cases, it's more often, I would say, equally distributed between all the things that are classic bank transfers and money laundering through channels that already exist, like, as you mentioned, when in a recent case, when you have some of the funds that go to countries like Israel for money laundering purposes, or even, and then for cryptocurrency, we also are seeing the same mechanisms that you have with traditional money. Traditional currency, you have the use of mixers, which are sort of compensation chambers, if you will, and you also have swappers with the possibility of exchanging one cryptocurrency to another to go to sort of anonymous cryptocurrencies. And we're also talking about fraud in terms of what we see for Europol. We see also real dematerialization of this type of fraud, because we're seeing more and more what we call crime as a service, with different platforms that are set up by facilitators who make available to the criminals, the fraudsters, a bunch of technological solutions that help them to make these crimes. And so whether it's for phishing kits or spoofing services, or the use of carding technologies. The point of all of this is to democratize, in the bad sense, for criminal purposes, all these different technologies. So these platforms give tools to the criminals to attack. So individuals who don't have a real technological background can use these services to do attacks and very sophisticated frauds. And this is the kind of thing that we didn't see more in the past, but we see more and more now, is that these tools also allow fraudsters to sort of like go into different countries where they couldn't do it before. Now, we talked about different methods or different types of fraud. Notably, one of the technologies is what was called a wrapper. I think wrapper, excuse me. We've talked about different forms of fraud where people would have used the identity, for example, of the head of the national police, or the prefecture, the head of the prefecture, or a person at Europol. I even had to file a complaint because somebody was trying to steal my identity. So if you get an email from me, it's not mine. It's not my email. Now in this context, where people are stealing identities of authorities, even. We have groups that are no longer afraid of getting this type of people can like take a document that's an official document, they'll copy it, they'll rewrite it, and then we can even see this in certain French-speaking countries. They're going to try to commit this type of fraud in Romania and Australia by sending sort of official-looking documents. And obviously, they're no longer worried about language barriers because we have automatic translation. These were things that were unthinkable back in the day. So now we have a real globalization of fraud. And with, as we say, technologies that are more and more perfected, and anybody can have access to these technologies for very, very cheap. In 2023, Europol noted, for example, we had the Cookie Monster case against Genesis Market, and then you could see, we talked about digital identification, and it was a real marketplace that was specialized in the sale of digital identities. And it's not just the copying a password like we had in the past, but it's really getting the entire fingerprint of the person. So it would put all the used cookies to reproduce the web browser of the target, and put into place, therefore, different tools that would allow the money to get extorted. There's a number of companies were hit by that, and we've also seen the second directive recently on payment services, the PSD2, where you have this two-factor identification or multiple-factor identification. So there's a number of countermeasures that are being put into place, but in any case, the regulations are trying to resolve this.
We can see there's automation, globalization, automation. Just a few words, and I'll give the floor to. We talked about in the conference of this the intervention of Europol and the 11 countries that took part into that. But maybe you could come back to this and make the link with the fact that Lockbit is an association that allows franchisees to as Clément Domingo said, franchisee who could take part into the association and give some payback to the founder. Well, yes, we could compare it to, we talked about crime as a service, and Lockbit is the exact example of ransomware as a service. These are criminals that realize that they would make more money by being facilitators with franchises, affiliated, as we call them, but as Genesis Market, so for ridiculous prices. But for Lockbit, ransomware as a service, offering its franchises access to a panel that would make it easier. A ransomware attack that's supposed to be sophisticated, requiring a lot of technical skills, with a panel that allows full automation of all the actions that a cyber criminal should have, or at least a group of cyber criminals should master alone. So it went through the initial access. You had all the necessary tools for the stealer for steal data, exfiltration through Steelbit. You would have easily some lateralization with the victim's system, and a number of encryptors, depending on the operating system, so covering a wide array of things that ransomware wouldn't do. In this franchising system, you realize that the affiliates, the franchisee, were ready to pay 20% of their income to the administrators for each attack and only keep 80% for them because the system was so efficient. And in this precise case, we had the pleasure of coordinating and in this operation this February, allowing us to hit hard this biggest ransomware as a service with 200 franchises affiliated. So in terms of impact on the ecosystem of the cyber criminals, but also for the benefit of victims, we had a major impact. But that operation was a bit specific, and I want to spend too much time, but the whole process was done. At Europol, we tend to do that, not just compromising the infrastructure for criminals, but take into account the victims, take into account and then a proactive approach to the various victims for which we had deciphering solutions. We also have the aspect of making sure that the affiliated do not use this program. Then if they continue using this program, the information that we retrieved against them will allow us to lead a number of operations against the network later, and use of the infrastructure to communicate on the various actions of the police with an attack of administrators particularly, but also affiliates up to the personal accounts, with the sizing and the closing of 14,000 accounts with a number of hosting companies used by affiliated. Thank you for this detailed information. As we've seen, we have on the one hand really well-organized fraudsters with more and more complex tools that are simplified to allow any user to use them in an industrial scale. And I have a question for John-Eric before I give the floor to Benjamin. John-Eric, we've seen that you've got this ecosystem we just talked about. What are the resources? What do we have today to first detect the frauds and prevent them?
So this is an important thing we are working with. And a central part of that is transaction monitoring, both account transactions and card transactions. And looking for any abnormalities. Like I said, if I suddenly started transferring money at 2 o'clock in the morning, that would be a red flag because I'm sleeping at that time. If I suddenly started transferring money to some third country I never transferred money to before. So it's all about finding differences in behavior. So we monitor accounts, we monitor card transactions. We have then profiles. This used to be all rule-based. We had a set of rules that did this, but now with AI, we can do it much more intelligent. We have then rules for how people normally behave, but also fraudsters. For most fraudsters, it's an 8-hour day, so they work from 8 to 4, right? So there are patterns for fraudsters as well, so we can detect that. With AI, this is getting a lot better. We are now at the point where more than half the detections we do are done by AI. And remember, this is finding a needle in a haystack. Compared to the number of genuine transactions, it's a 0.007% or something that's fraudulent, so we're really looking for that needle in the haystack. But like I said, more than 50% now are detected by AI. And then we also provide a defense center with people working 7/24 that are looking at this, that are taking actions on these fraud cases, stopping them, or contacting the customer. Back to the dating or the romance fraud, we have a challenge there because sometimes we say, this is a romance fraud. For sure, there's no doubt about it. We get in touch with a customer and saying, you know what, you're being frauded. We want to stop this transaction. But no, they insist. No. This is to help pay the medical bill for the grandma or whatever, nitwit story they've gotten. So they've really been hacked by the AI and the fraudsters. So, but yeah, it's about monitoring transactions, detecting abnormalities.
Merci John-Eric. Benjamin.
Thank you, John-Eric. I'll give you the floor back, Benjamin. We have tools and we understand that we could put layers upon layers of processes to strengthen this individual protection. So how do you at France Connect strike the right balance between the user-friendliness and maximum security? Well, first of all, one of the central points to fight against frauds for users is to have an adapted level digital ID. What we are seeing today is that we have some proceedings that require a low level where login and password will be enough. However, we must also have some more secure digital identities for more sensitive approaches and the proceedings. that's more difficult for users. We have to secure the whole thing from the creation of the ID and what do I do if I lose my password? So it's sort of the daily use of that. So we have to support our users in France, at least. We have very few users who have a secured ID. As an example, in the number of connections we have on France Connect, we have roughly 10 to 12% of our connections are done through a secured digital identity. So it is the objective. When we prepared, you were saying that it's progressing. I mean, 2 years ago, we had 2 to 3%. So it's connected as well to the fact that we have implemented some sensitive procedure behind France Connect Plus, only offering secured IDs. So that's the good news. So by forcing users to use and create digital identities, secured ones, it goes into their habits, and on a daily basis, they're going to use them again and again for all the proceedings. So it's going to secure those processes. The use is going to secure the use of digital IDs. Could you come back to us or tell us between the France Connect, the difference between France Connect and France Connect Plus? Well, the main difference between the two is that the approaches, the proceedings that we put on accessible behind that. France Connect is for those proceedings. In case of identity theft, will not put at risk either the user behind it or the organization offering this proceeding. Now, if an organization has proceedings that, in case of identity theft, will put at risk the user, we saw it earlier on with the training account or hacking all the training credits, or put at risk the organization. In that case, we are going to offer only secured digital ID. There's only one called the one from La Poste, and others are coming. France Identité is coming, offered by the Minister of Interior, generalized last month, coming to France Connect Plus soon. And we are working with other players offering international, including some that are being qualified by ANSI to have a seal of approval on secure digital ID. We have two, including that have already presented on France Connect, that are going to be available from France Connect Plus. Iris that is already on France Connect, that hopefully will be available from France Connect Plus. Before I give the floor to John-Eric, maybe a question for you, for Benjamin. When we prepared this roundtable, and it was mentioned by Paul Alexander, you talked about the intelligence of fraudsters by using vocabulary. And I don't want to spoil it, but maybe you want to explain what we talked about? Well, yes. What we've noticed is that for fraudsters, they adapt very quickly to the measures that we implement. And they're going to know how to talk to users to give them an impression of trust. We've noticed, for example, in the various techniques they've used on calls, for example, they pretend to be France Connect or La Poste or even other services to support users in the creation of their digital identity, and really are going to create more trust than we managed to do, and are going to support users in creating this digital identity, which is not easy to create actually, and with the final intention of using this process so that users create that and so they can use it for fraud. So we've seen that. We talked about solutions for citizens and users, but in addition, we've seen that the percentage went 2 to 12, which remains low. Unfortunately, John-Eric, it is the same thing in companies. I think that we are still lacking awareness, culture, support. Maybe you could tell us more about that. What are the resources to support companies to raise the awareness of the employees to that?
Yeah, of course, awareness is important to know that this is going around. But then again, as said, the fraudsters are getting more and more clever. They're hitting the weakest link, which is the people, and trying to get access through people. And we need to we need to educate people, make them think twice about, does this feel right? I'm also talking about double controls, right? Instead of having, if just one person being able to do a large transfer, both me and you have to confirm the same transfer. That's going to help a lot. One thing we're seeing interesting in these days of, instant everything, every payments, everything should be instant. A Swedish bank recently introduced a saving account with a 3-day delay, right? So if you say you want to get money out on that account, well, it takes 3 days before you get the money. That gives the user time to think, wow, was this right? And it also gives our fraud department the possibility to, investigate. That's a challenge with the instant. We have so little time to do that investigation. So actually by increasing the friction is one way to reduce this. But also then verification. Let's say you do get a call from the CEO saying, like a video call. More and more products are now coming where you can do face-to-face verification. So, for example, the Swedish Freya EID, I can show a QR code. Anybody could scan that QR code to verify it's me. So you could do like a face-to-face verification over a video call as well to know I'm talking to the right person.
Et Jean-Éric, il y a quelques années, j'avais discuté avec Onfido sur un...
Sorry, I was talking with someone on a different trade fair to see how they were using AI to try and anticipate some false connections or bots trying to connect to their platforms. But they realized that all the evolution they had in AI, the same thing was also used by hackers, with even being ahead of them. Do you still have the feeling that hackers, fraudsters, and so on who try to steal identities are ahead of us or use the same tools as you?
It's always a challenge. I mean, our problem is we have to follow regulations. The fraudsters, they don't care about regulations. They don't care about GDPR and PSD2, PSD3, etc. And we also know the fraudsters are using AI to test our defenses. They are testing different kind of fraud techniques to see which kind of transactions can they run through the systems. And when they find something, well, then they're going to run on that one. So yes, the fraudsters will always be one step ahead because they don't follow the rules we have to follow. And just quick side note, you mentioned crime as a service is interesting. I mean, we're using ChatGPT. If I try to ask ChatGPT to, create a phishing email, it's going to say, you know what, I don't do that. Well, guess what? On the dark web, you have a fraud GTP that doesn't have those limitations.
Merci pour cette précision.
Thank you for making this clear. Thank you. Paul Alexander, you talked about identification, two-factor identification for the SP2 transit. Could you talk about the feedback and best practices, maybe shared together as we get to the last part of our discussion to see what's happening, what can we do, can we improve, and the best practices? Well, yes. When we talk authorized payment, thought about the human being the linchpin in this case, the victim, and all the engineering around it. It says that will help the fraud happening. Best practices to be implemented is clearly to launch more awareness campaigns targeting various categories of population, because the angle of fraudsters is going to be different depending on the category of population that they target, depending on the technical skills of potential victims. So there is an education effort to be made. We're talking about digital identity and the process to create it. For someone who is a newbie in this, it's more or less complicated. And I would be happy to have this kind of support, rather from a fraudster or from a legitimate employee. Next to this, of course, there's and this is something that is really the latest trend, but I think it is going to make a difference, is the public-private partnership. There's an example that worked quite well, actually, that we pushed at EUROPOL, is an initiative from Finland, who launched a major national initiative with, on the one hand, the regulators and then the police and the telecom partners. It was an anti-spoofing initiative so that we could systematically, thanks to the three players and the private-public partnership, systematically detect and stop all calls from abroad to Finnish numbers. Just by this, it was amazing how a reduction of 90% of spoofing attacks. It's not much, but it is something that actually was striking, and we're trying to promote it even more. Now, I'm, of course, being my own advocate here, but we really encourage people, and I was saying that when I was in France, to lodge complaints to even for small frauds, because sometimes it could be just 100 or 1,000 euros. The problem is that if these amounts, this means that it could have been done massively, and therefore you're not the only one to have been hit. So the fact that we can retrieve, first, it gives us good visibility and gives us the of collecting data on the various attacks. And then in terms of investigations, if you talk just about the judicial aspect, the investigators need data to go further in their investigations, and they can only get this data through complaints and alerts. They're very good. I mean, talk about France, but you can go to your gendarmerie or your police station. You can go to cybermalveillance in France, or we are lucky to have all that in France, because other countries in Europe, I'm thinking, for example, I hope there's no Germans in this room, but we had discussion with them. It remains really on the lander responsibility. It's very difficult to have a global vision of digital fraud. So we are doing it well in France. That's encouraging. Now, also joint actions to fight efficiently against these digital frauds. And I'm thinking, for example, about the European program called Impact and the online fraud priority. And every year we support an action called against digital skimming. And the last action was last October, November, gathering 17 countries. And following these various months of actions, this gave rise to shedding the light and actually warning 43 online shopkeepers, saying that their data from their customers had been stolen. So this is something we are encouraging, and of course we have to go for that. And once again, it's only normal, but as being part of a European agency of police cooperation, I really think that cooperation and sharing information is key at national level. And in this panel, it so happens that it's interesting because we have three opinions that are totally complementary on the perception of the issue and how we can solve it. And from the police forces side, an effort to target, because we all have limited resources, targeting those illegal platforms of crime as a service, because we fight against facilitating these crimes, but also by taking the data from these services, we manage most of the time down to the identity of the fraudsters. So it's a two-in-one, killing two birds with one stone here. So, and then again, private-public partnership, and really encourage that. The cyber Europol, but also the national agencies of the police forces need some information from the private sector, and sometimes to be able to have to make up cases in link with the companies that have the feedback, so saving time and having a more efficient response. Well, thank you very much, Paul. Alexander, you mentioned in one of your issues, and I give the floor to Benjamin next, about raising the awareness, that education aspect. I'd like to say, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, you address a very heterogeneous population on your platform. So how do you raise awareness, and what are the tools that you've implemented? Well, raising awareness will go through various tools. First, through the tools we have in the identifying interfaces, we're going to raise awareness on the fact that when you actually use digital ID, there will be a number of messages sent to users to tell them, do not enter do not enter an authentication you are not the origin of. That's and then we also have awareness programs where we're going to support people when people were the victim of theft, so you can detect identity theft and how can an act after my identity has been stolen, given the good practices, or tell her what she can do to protect the identity. So we have tools that protect, monitor the activity of their online identities and block certain identities. If today you want to use only secure identities such as La Poste or Iris, and you don't want to use what we call the low one, you can block them as well. So raising the awareness is also supporting them that they have the possibility to do that, to monitor their activity on a daily basis, the use, and be alerted when there is a use of their digital identity for a proceeding that is potentially unusual. So they are alerted in that case, and also tell them, and it was, as we said, lodge complaints. And what we're going to do, it's not really raising awareness, but what Paul Alexandre was saying is coordination with the various players. We are going to feed back to the identity suppliers to tell them potentially we've detected, it was communicated that there was an identity theft. Feed that back to the supplier, potentially see whether it's massive. It's a massive action, and then we're also going to do it to be able to cancel the effect of the fraud, for example. So it's a whole coordination, as was said before, between the various players at the level of the ecosystem of France Connect and France Connect Plus for digital identity. Well, thank you, Benjamin. Maybe a last question as we're getting to the end of this session, and maybe takes a couple of questions. Jean-Eric, the Nordic countries are highly digitalized, and that's been the case for a number of years. But however, there are discussions within this geographical area about the next step of bank ID. So how do you see these evolutions? Are they limited to some regions, or do you feel like what Paul Alexandre said, that you should have a European-wide vision? How do you see this?
So for one, yeah, we have, I call them bank IDs. There are different names in different countries, but bank IDs. And the good part is that they have a consistent user experience. So I use the same for a lot of different purposes. What we're seeing coming now, and just following on what you said, is context is important. You need to understand, why am I now proving my identity? You should get context information saying, it's because you're taking up a loan for 2 million euros, or you're transferring 100 euros to your child, or something like that. So context is really important. And then going forward, I think, and it's been mentioned several times here, is the EIDAS regulation, which gives every user a digital identity wallet for holding your identity, but also all kind of other information. And it should also be possible to use cross-border, so I should be able to use it in every country in Europe. The challenge is that we are now putting even more value in the same identity, making it even more attractive target for the fraudsters, meaning we need to step up the protection as well. And yes, we need to have all this mechanism using biometry for this. I haven't mentioned close relation fraud, which we see as a problem. People living in the same household have access to my phone, will know my password, can take up a loan in my name and legally sign it by using bank ID. That is a challenge that we are addressing for high-risk transactions. Well, you need to look into the camera to say it's really me using my bank ID, etc. But I think on the European level, that's important. I also want to quickly comment, you mentioned cooperation, and that is important. We have seen some challenges of GDPR preventing cooperation. The compliance officer for GDPR said, no, we can't share this information. But I say, hey, just a fraudster, we want to share information to the other banks and the other players that this is a fraudster. No, 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 GDPR. Fortunately, this is now being addressed in PSD3 and PSR to encourage more cooperation, more sharing of data between the different players. So I think we're seeing the EU payment package is encouraging that, making a more holistic view on Europe, and also the IDES with the IDES wallet, which will hopefully be very good, but also stepping up the challenge. We need to protect it even more than the existing solutions.
Alors,